Welcome to The Real Recipe, the podcast that brings you the perfect blend of real estate trends and topics, where we serve up fresh insights and sizzling strategies. So let's get cooking. All right, welcome back to The Real Recipe. Today we're going to have an interesting discussion about buying tenant-occupied properties and all the ins and outs of doing so, some of the pitfalls, some of the challenges, and some of the upside. So with that, let's get cooking.
I love it. That was a good intro. So the way I look at it and the way that I speak to agents about this is basically, what are you looking for your client? What do you want to have up front if you're representing an investor who's purchasing an investment property, multifamily, could be single family. But what do you need? What's part of the due diligence? So you want copies of the leases. You want to confirm that the landlord has the rents. They're current. The tenants are current on rent. They have the security deposit. The biggest thing with the security that always comes up is A, is the landlord holding it, and B, did they even put it in a security deposit account, which is a huge issue.
Well, let's before we get into some of the intricacies of it.
Sure.
So you're obviously, we're talking about buying properties and they have tenants in them.
Yeah.
Those tenants can represent either long-term leases, short-term leases. It's important up front, before even signing on the dotted line, that you know what kind of tenant you're getting even beforehand, right? It
doesn't always work that way.
No, but you should be able to get access to the leases or get some information up front, like, hey, is this month to month? Is this a short-term lease, like 6 months in? Are they 1 year in? Are they 2 years in? Are they in for 10 years?
You might get some verbals on that, but you won't get hard copies of documents up front from the seller's side.
You should be at least asking.
No.
It's good to ask. It's good to ask.
You should definitely be asking. Your agent should be asking, but you're not getting any of that documentation until you're in New Jersey, at least until you're under attorney review, or if you've signed a PSA because it's a four plus unit.
Of course, understood.
So, but no, it's good to think about. It's okay. Well, if I'm buying a tenant-occupied property, what am I buying it for?
Right.
Am I buying it as an investment? Am I going to live there? Because if I'm going to live there and it's occupied, a whole different conversation you're having with your client, right?
Right. What are the tenants paying for or not paying for? What's your responsibility as the landlord or as the owner?
So if you're first off, if you're buying to live there, right, you're going to be an owner occupant, and you're buying a property that's occupied by tenants, whether it's a single family or more. You need to identify, aside from the single family, which unit you're going to live in. Mm-hmm. And hopefully there's no leases in place, because, again, you can't just break a lease that's a valid lease just because you're going to live there. So if
I can't just kick people out?
Well, so let's start with that.
Try.
I'm not allowed to do that.
If you're a buyer and we'll start with that category of buyers first. If you're buying a property and you're intending to live there, how do you go about that? Because obviously there's a certain amount of notice you have to give to, like, from the beginning. Mm-hmm. How do you start with that notice?
Yeah, so if you're buying a property and you know that you can get a tenant out, because a tenant is month to month, right? Mm-hmm. They don't have a lease, their lease has expired, then that's the tenant you can get out, right? So what you have to do is get the seller on board to serve them with the notice to quit for possession, meaning that the buyer is going to take possession of that unit upon closing, and that tenant needs to be out on or before the closing date. Mm-hmm. So that's all well and good. You can jump through the hoops, get the documentation sent out, serve the notice to quit.
What's the timeline on that?
So if it's month to month, you have to provide a 30-day notice to quit. 30 days. That's the minimum.
That's so short.
Yeah, it's like a full month too, isn't it?
So it depends. So you have discussions. I'll have discussions with different landlord-tenant attorneys. Some will say it's just 30 days from when you provide the notice. Others will say, well, it's 30 days from the first of the month that follows the notice you provided. So if I provide the notice on April 15th, technically the 30 days runs from May 1st.
Right.
And that's just to be safe and give a little extra time and
Sure.
hopefully get the courts on your side in terms of saying, well, look, I gave them extra time. Yeah. I've had attorneys who've told me they've done just 30 days from the date of receipt and then 30 days from the first of the month following the receipt. But either way, you send the notice.
Yep.
There's no guarantee.
Yep.
Right? There's no guarantee that tenant will get out. So depending on how the contract's worded, that could be on the buyer. That could fall right on the buyer. So closing comes and goes. Tenant, in unit one that you were supposed to occupy then stays. Now that's on you to evict. Even though you served the notice to quit, that doesn't mean you can just
but
force
it
them
has
out.
to be specific in the contract. There has to be that clause in there in the contract that you're specifically asking that the tenant get notified and the tenant leaves because you intend to move in there.
Right.
That has to be in the contract. If it's not in the contract, good luck.
Yeah, then you're taking subject to the tenancy. But most of the time you're having it in there that, landlord will provide unit 1 vacant prior to closing.
Correct.
So most of the time...
And then that disclosure requirement or that notice to quit is on the landlord, not on the buyer.
Right. We, as the buying side, will request that the landlord file that or serve that. Sorry.
Yep.
And if the tenant doesn't get out, then most likely, typical situation is that the closing gets extended.
Mm-hmm.
But then, what happens when my rate's expiring and I need to get in there, we need to close. So you have plenty of situations where, unfortunately, buyers may be in a position where they have to take the tenant, and now they have to move forward with an eviction. Now, what do you do? Well, maybe we set up some sort of escrow agreement with the seller that says, okay, look, put in X amount of money into escrow. Mm-hmm. We'll work on filing the eviction. We have somewhere to stay, hopefully.
Yep.
Because if you don't, then the deal's probably dead in the water. But we'll move forward with the eviction, and then hopefully we have enough money in the escrow to cover it. And if we don't, seller's on the hook for it because you were supposed to provide it to us vacant. So that's one of the most common situations. Mm-hmm. The most common situation with investors that I get, especially newer investors, is, well, I want all of them out. I want them all out.
Just because they want fresh new tenants in there, or they want to redo the leases?
These 3 tenants have been in this property for 15 years apiece, and they pay $1,000, and market rent in Madison is $2,500 for one. Let's just say a 1-bedroom, whatever it is. I want them out. I'm like, okay, good luck.
Yeah.
You can't just for that reason you can't. Even so, it doesn't matter if they're month to month or whatever it is. You can't just send them a notice to quit because you want to get them out and get someone else in who's going to pay more. So you can renew them.
I'm with you on that. But you even though you're buying a property that's tenant occupied, you're still subject to the lease that
of course.
landlord signed.
Right.
So it's not as simple as just saying, get the heck out.
No.
You're bound by that document until such time that the lease either expires or.
But even if the lease has expired, you still can't just get them out.
No.
Yeah,
I know.
So most of the time when these clients come to me, I say, well, unfortunately, you can get them out, but you have to put them somewhere, give them a place to stay while you renovate, and then put them back in and hope that you.
It's not my problem.
Right. You send them a notice, either a notice to quit with the renewal, and if they don't agree to the renewal, and then they stay, now you have to evict them. So it's like you remember those like charts that's like yes, no, and then it goes this way.
Right.
It's like yes and no, and then it goes this way. They all end towards eviction.
Right.
Like
carefully worded attorney letter usually solves that problem.
You'd be surprised.
I don't know. You get smart tenants.
You know what? Here's
stupid ones.
Professional tenants.
No, you have two.
Right. Yes.
At the bottom, you have 2. It's evict or cash for keys.
Yeah.
And usually, you're going to end up doing a cash for keys. And if people don't know what cash for keys, is cash for keys is exactly what it sounds like. I give you cash, you give me the keys back.
Yeah, you're paying some.
I'm doing that right now with a client. We're selling a multifamily home, and one of the tenants just hasn't paid, and he said, "Look, get your security deposit back. I'll give you 3-4 months of rent, and you promise to leave on the 30th." And then at that point, what you do is you file a stipulation, you file a settlement agreement, and then you file a confession of judgment with the court, and now you have that on record.
Sounds like a lot of legal work.
Yeah, it's great. It is. It's a lot of legal work.
That's why John's talking about it mostly.
Right. You have to get. You have to get your. On this situation, I'm getting my litigation team involved because now you're recording, filing documents with the courts.
Yeah.
To put it on record that you have this agreement, and we can, if they don't leave, then you go to the court.
Yeah.
But again, it all points towards even with that. That's cash for keys.
Who you work with matters.
Yeah, who you work with matters, but also you might still have to evict someone.
Right.
As unfortunate as that is, it's a legal remedy to. Unfortunately, it's a legal remedy to just people being stupid and just either trying to take advantage of you as the landlord or you as the owner, and
or just really not having somewhere else to go. Like really not actually.
Yeah, I've
No,
run into
that's-
that. I've run into that, and
Especially-
but predominantly that's an excuse.
Yeah.
That's just an excuse because they don't want to move, or they don't want to leave, or they don't want to pack up their house and leave.
Right.
But that's a common one.
Yeah.
I have nowhere. Where am I going to go? I'm paying $1,500. Where am I going to go for $1,500?
Right, where they don't have somewhere to go where they're paying comparable rent, I should say.
Right. Oh, I don't want to move 15 minutes away. My job is right here. That's too far of a commute.
But,
Sounds like Ryan speaking from experience. I don't
yeah,
know.
Ryan's like, wait, we have to drive
never-
an extra 5 minutes? Like, no. It's
Right.
fine.
Well,
Right.
no car. They had to walk. So.
But provided, I mean, provided that all goes okay.
Yeah.
You know, we're in good shape with that. During the course, like when we talk about contingencies, what are other things that buyers need to be aware of, whether you're an investor or not, that you have to get checked out during your due diligence period?
Well, okay, that one, and we should also talk about how is it different when you're buying a 50-unit building,
Well,
right?
obviously, yeah.
No, but like you know what's different when you're, or even a 50 units probably too big, but when you're buying like a 12 unit or 15-unit building
just
where
make it
it's enough where you can manage on
Yeah.
your own, but not enough where maybe you're paying 15 or
management
20% to
But
to a
even the
management company
jump
to do it
from
for you.
one, like a single family to 4 family is going to have a difference. So if we're talking in a smaller
Yeah.
scale
Yeah.
too, what are the main things that we're
From
looking at due diligence wise?
From an investor's perspective, yeah. I mean, aside from looking at the leases and getting all that information in and making sure you get your estoppel certificates, which, obviously goes over how much the rent is, security, that they're current, getting attornment letters in place, which basically are your tenant notification letters telling the tenant, we are changing over, you'll have a new landlord starting X date, this is who you have to pay, this is where you have to pay, where you have to send your payment. On anything over, now depending on how the property is owned on a 1 or 2 family home, anything over 2 family, so 3+, you're making sure you comply with bulk sale. So that's a buyer's obligation, even though it's a seller's financial liability. If you don't do it, it becomes your liability. So you have to submit a form to the state. Anytime an entity is selling an asset, primarily in this case real estate, right? You have to file bulk sale if it's 3+ family, or if it's a 1 to 2 unit that is owned by an entity, LLC, corporation. You want to make sure there's no income tax due on any money that they've received from that property, from the sale, right? Or upon the sale. So what we do is we have to file a C-9600 with the state, not to get too technical, fill it out, seller information, buyer information, property information, EIN, socials, whatever it is, and then file with the state, and you hope to get a letter back that says, we're not imposing liability, no escrow money is needed. I got one the other day, there was like $1,000 escrow. That's all we need.
Right. And that's not, and they have to respond to you within 10 days, do they not?
No,
on that?
you have to submit, or the attorney has to submit at least 10 days prior to closing. So normally on commercial deals,
Right.
or deals where I know that bulk sale 100% applies, you get, for me as a buyer, you get a C-9600 up front with the attorney review letter that says, hey,
You have to
once
file
we're
this.
concluded, like, just fill out your seller portion and I'll do the rest, because it's a buyer's obligation to file.
We talked about this before too, because obviously the title company is going to require it, but sometimes we'll get pushed back. I know you get pushed back from some sellers' attorneys on filing it, and it's ridiculous to me that that's the case.
I get pushed back all the time, and I just file it.
Right.
I don't need your approval.
You're kind of doing it for them too, so.
Right.
anyone
The
can
reason
file
why
it.
the reason why they file it is they don't know if the state is going to come back and say there needs to be a ton of money held back, and there's
Well, obviously that's the reason we
no,
check it.
I mean, right. But they also try to argue, well, it's in my client's course
of business.
ordinary course of
Yeah.
business, which is like they say is the natural exemption of bulk sale. But I don't know you. I don't know your client. I don't know what your client does. So if you're just John Sherman LLC and you're selling a piece of property that you renovated, how do I know?
How do you know what they do?
I don't know.
Exactly.
Unless you're Toll Brothers or you're Pulte or one of these big guys, like I don't know what you do.
Right.
Or one of these big commercial developers that you're familiar with. I don't know that this is your ordinary course of business. Oh, my client's done 5 of these this year. I don't care what you say. It's still my obligation to protect my client.
Like, and you're dealing with sellers' attorneys.
Yeah.
The seller's attorneys sometimes will give pushback on
They
it.
know this.
I know they do, but
Some of them do, but some do give pushback.
the ones that
It's
even
just-
know it still push back, and they're like, "Oh, don't worry, I'll put something in my affidavit of title for the seller." And I'm like, "I don't want it.
Right,
I'm
it's not really gonna hold
going
up.
to
Yeah.
file the C-9600, and we'll see what comes back. I've had an attorney put in his review letter that we were not allowed to file it. I filed it. I was curious. Got a waiver. It's fine.
And
Well, you
It
gotta
was fine,
know.
right.
Buyers
But I
gotta
need
know.
to know.
Yeah,
I need
yeah.
to know. You know, like if it came back, I'd argue and go from there. But bulk sale is very important on investment and commercial and multifamilies. Yeah.
So bulk sale is important,
Yeah.
obviously. Making sure you do your due diligence on it is
I think that's the
right?
theme of like the podcast. Sometimes just do
And-
your do your due diligence.
And confirming with how many units it's actually
Yeah,
able to
so-
be rented for.
So you do. So I do.
Oh, yeah,
I
that's
do a lot of
another
work.
one. Is it a legal 3-family?
so I
or is
do a
it
lot
legal
of work.
4-family?
Yeah, I do a lot of work in Union City, and in Union City you tend
Hey,
to
that
get
tenant
those-
in the basement.
Yeah,
But there, like
no,
in Newark?
all the time.
All the time. All
Two
the
family,
time.
and it's like, I'll get my clients. They'll call me up and, yeah, there's this tenant I have in the basement. I'm like, yeah.
Right.
What about him? Oh,
I was expecting this call.
yeah, right. Well, he pays
yeah.
me. He doesn't really want to leave. I said, well,
Yeah.
that's gonna be a problem because the records show there's a 2-family house, not a 3-family house.
Right.
It's really an issue when, I mean, not that if someone's buying cash, it's not an issue too, but
No.
if you're getting a loan
And you have an
and you
appraisal.
have an appraiser coming out,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
good luck.
How do you hide- you can-
explaining to them why there's a
pull
finished basement
you
that
can
someone
pull an
knows.
oven. You can't pull a tenant.
Right, exactly. With all their stuff.
Well, and it's funny too. Like that too. Like as you're going
It's
in,
obvious.
you're looking at. Oh yeah, hey, there's a hot plate and a stove and one of those little
Yeah.
Walmart refrigerators in the basement. And there's clearly a unit there. Like,
We just had this.
did you not think we would figure that
or
out?
there's like a guy sleeping downstairs.
Right.
Like, what am I gonna
we had this happen and we got away with it. Somehow we were able to get it done. The oven gas line was capped. The tenant
yeah.
left for the day, but like
that's fringe stuff.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
when you're buying tenant occupied properties, it's always important to do. Most people, especially the smaller type of units, the 1 to 4 family for newer investors, they don't know what they don't know yet because they
Right.
probably more often than not they're green. They don't know to look for all these things. They don't know to ask all these questions. Certainly, the agent should be asking some of these questions, and even the agent may only be
that's why you have an
relatively
attorney.
new to the business and may
Right.
not even know the questions to ask. So it's always important when you're buying an investment or you're going to invest some money in real estate that you're asking these questions up front. Like, hey, what kind of tenants are they? Can we get the tenants out?
Can I meet the tenants?
You're right. Are the units all legal units? Especially if you walk into a basement and you see that it's a unit or what looks to be like a unit, you got to ask some questions, right?
I have clients that when they go on their inspection, they'll like try and chat with the
the
tenants.
tenants.
Get some information from them.
Oh yeah, you usually find out
Yeah.
good stuff.
Yeah.
At that.
That's when you find out good stuff. Like,
Yeah.
like, have you paid?
Well, you know what I love is when, and this I feel like happens a lot, and I'll see this when tenants actually end up trying to buy the unit from the landlord if they
Yes.
get wind of this. But, it comes up somehow in conversation that the owner of the property has not been either paying their mortgage
Oh, yeah,
or they're not
yeah,
paying
yep,
property
yep.
taxes if they own it outright. And the tenants find out that they've been paying rent to this person for however long, and they're just literally pocketing their rent
Yeah.
because they're not paying their mortgage, and then they're pissed.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Well, because then they can lose their like.
Yeah,
Right.
they
could
lose their
literally lose
home.
where they. Well, I mean, yeah, but then
Well, yes and
well,
no,
'cause
because
Yes and no.
how many foreclosures and REOs do you? I'm sorry, how many
Right.
foreclosures can you buy at a sheriff's sale or REO properties that are still occupied?
Well, you
by
don't because
prior
when
tenants?
when you do that,
Yeah.
the foreclosure. I don't. But you could probably speak better to this, but when you foreclose, you're foreclosing on everybody. You're including the tenants, so you have to foreclose on the tenants to legally be able to remove them.
and they won't be, but they
They
can,
won't
but they
kick
can
'em out,
stay.
though.
They won't kick them out.
Yeah.
They won't kick them
So-
out, but you have to do foreclosure
Yeah.
proceedings on them.
Well, you
in
get
order
eviction. You'll get eviction
Yeah.
proceedings on the tenants
Yeah.
on
Right.
foreclosures, but that doesn't mean that again. Like when I used to handle REO, you would have tenants, prior mortgagers in the property, and sometimes these investors are buying the REO with them in it, and they're
Right.
like, "Well, I'll take the risk. It's too good of a deal. I'll take the risk and evict them or
then it becomes you go back to cash for keys.
Yeah.
All right. Here's
Right, you
10
come
grand.
back, yeah.
10
And
grand,
and REO agents try to do like that's where I feel as though cash for keys really started is in that REO foreclosure
Yeah,
realm
yeah,
when
yep.
you go to this property.
I've done it before.
Yeah, no, I mean it's not like.
And what's surprising about it is it's usually not as expensive as everybody thinks it is. Because usually you get most tenants will leave for
most, but.
You'll get a few,
Just
like
because
she's a professional.
You're so friendly, Ryan.
Yeah,
No,
you come in
Like
all
Ryan
bubbly.
goes to the door and he's like, "Hello, good
talk to
sir.
them.
I'd like to offer you something."
I'd like to offer you some.
Oh,
cash.
He's there with like a gift basket and some
He
cash.
seems like a legit guy.
Wait.
Listen, you seem like a nice guy.
Ryan.
So,
Ryan.
He seems like a good guy.
Ryan is buying bottles of wine and gift cards for the neighbors on our flip
right.
as like a.
I didn't do it yet. I have to.
He still hasn't done it, but he's been wanting to do it.
Yeah,
as
I forgot to do it.
Sorry for all the noise. No, but it's a good idea.
Oh my
but
God, what a kiss ass.
No, but I tell you what.
No, it helps.
I've done
It's
it. I've done it.
Yeah.
And you know what? You either when it comes to tenant-occupied properties, they'll tell you. Like you'll get the neighbors start dishing on everybody in the neighborhood,
Oh, yeah.
and you start finding out all the fun. That's like when we were at the house, and you just get all the neighbors start talking to you.
Yeah.
Oh, they bring you in the house.
That's part of Ryan's due diligence. He does like a
Oh,
block
yeah.
party.
Let me tell you
Invites
something.
everybody
one
over.
one of the best pieces of due diligence are speaking to the neighbors.
Absolutely.
Like in a townhouse community, or kind of like you.
That's
the amount of information we received.
Our next podcast should be why speaking to the neighbors on a flip is important,
man.
Or just
or
on
on
a
investment
flip.
property.
I mean,
Boy, did we learn a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But then
you
also
learn a
like
lot. You definitely learn
we
a lot.
walked into, the neighbor was like, this is now shifting, but like whatever. The neighbor was like, "Oh, come on and see our unit." And I'm like, "Oh, this is cool. Like we got some conceptually got
Yeah.
some good ideas, but
But that was
it
an
does work.
interesting situation. Kind of like dovetails with this a little bit, even though it was use and occupancy.
Right.
But it's kind of the same thing. You're getting a tenant. You're at least
Right,
short term tenant, and it doesn't always work out. Whether you do have to force them out or kick them out, and it's
or you don't have a tenant, you end up having a squatter. And now you're not filing an eviction, but now you have to go through an ejectment action. And
that's a good conversation for another one
That's a whole
too.
Another episode too, because obviously talking about specific to New Jersey,
Yeah.
just not
The
as
rules.
easy as people think it is.
No.
Like you said,
No,
even when that
we
lease expires, it's like that person's a tenant for life, pretty much.
Perfect example, on our flip, we had the use and occupancy in place. Seller stays. There's no landlord-tenant relationship, right? Because we have a UNO, but tenant stays. She has a daughter and a grandson, older grandson in his mid to late 20s, that are living there.
Right.
Okay, so they have no legal interest, no legal right to be there. They're only there because we bought from her and they live there. So whatever, they stay for the 23, 24, no, they're 30-something days.
No, 21 days. 21 days, but it wound up being
30, longer, 30-something, yeah. So, but there was a point where she, the owner, seller, picked up and left.
Yeah.
And her kids,
her daughter, and the son
50-something-year-old daughter and 20-something-year-old grandson
Right.
in the house. And at that point, I was like, well, we really are going to have to file an ejectment action. At first, we were going to because she stayed beyond the vacate date of the UNO. And I was like,
Yeah.
all right, here we go. We're going. I had one of my attorneys at my office getting all the ejectment paperwork ready to file with special civil in New Jersey, because it's not the same as an eviction. You don't have to go to the eviction landlord tenant court, but it still takes as long. Maybe not as long, but it still takes a long time. And I'm like, here we go. We have to now really file the ejectment action because we have two people that are in the property that have no legal right to the property. They're squatters, but get a complaint, file the complaint, wait for a response. They get like 35 days to respond for a court date. Then that doesn't happen. And then if you get the judge to jump for you and get it done, then you got to get rid of possession. It's just like
listen, that's definitely a conversation or topic for a different day. But I think to kind of wrap this up a little bit, right? Like, if you're buying investment properties and it's coming with tenants, you obviously need to be asking questions and doing your due diligence up front because you can get yourself into a situation where you got a tenant that you don't want. But at least if you're asking questions, talk to the neighbors. Always a good one. But make sure you do your due diligence. Make sure that the property's legal. It's got all the units are legal, right? And make sure you've tried to review leases if you can.
One little tip.
Okay.
All right.
Money tips.
It's about money. It's about security deposits. Okay. Little tip.
Yeah.
If you have a lease and you or your attorney's reviewing the lease, and this is how I caught it on my end, you're reviewing a lease from 10 years ago. And you notice from 10 years ago, the security deposit was $2,500, and then the credit you're getting at closing is $2,500. The math doesn't add up because you are supposed to, in residential real estate, deposit that security deposit into a security deposit account that accrues interest. And then the landlord names the tenant as a beneficiary on that account. So for 10 years...
Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
so many people probably don't catch that.
No, and this was the biggest topic when we did our roundtable with Coldwell Banker.
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest things that everyone, their minds exploded, and they're like, well, what happens? Well, okay, so you don't do that. So in my situation, tenant buying from landlord, right? Had the security deposit not in an account for 15 years. And then I forget, obviously I can't run the numbers right now, and I don't have it pulled up, but the amount of money she received in a seller concession at closing.
Yeah.
So let's say her deposit was like $3,500 15 years ago, whatever it was. I want to say her credit was 5 figures. It was, in the teens
Yeah.
in concessions because this guy did not put that money in the correct account.
Well,
So whenever my clients at closing are buying an investment property and they're getting credited for the security deposit, I don't have it listed on there as a seller concession or security deposit credit. I have that as a line item on the closing disclosure as Unit 1 security deposit
yeah.
made payable to the LLC or the seller, and this way at closing they get the check, and then I tell them go to your bank
Take that. And
from here and set up the security deposit account ASAP.
I feel like that's something that should. I mean, you're not going to get the finals, but right before closing, but ironing that out early on, just
But
to
it's
the other
hard.
side, just saying just ensuring that the security deposit that's being
You try, but even as a seller's attorney, you don't know if your client is giving you the right information.
absolutely.
You just don't.
Yeah.
So it's even if you convey that, like, yes, my client told me that he had the money in a security deposit account for the last 10 years.
Right.
And you get to closing and the guy is cutting you a check for $2,500 and you're like,
Sorry.
So how do you
where's the
cure
interest?
that if you get to closing, you get the final figures and that happens?
Well, it doesn't close until we rectify
Figure
it.
it out.
Right.
I mean,
Figure
it's
out the
realistically, it
amount.
could probably be done, but then what? Now we're talking about concessions, and what happens if my client, they already have a concession, and now we're dealing with the bank who's going to say,
Right,
and it's not a cash
it's
deal.
affecting your
but
closing
and now the bank
costs.
tells
but it wouldn't be a concession towards the.
Well, I'm telling you right now, it's not going to be because I don't have it listed on the concession,
Correct.
right? We're going to
Yeah.
itemize it out as a check.
Correct.
We'll
Well, that's how it
figure-
should be. That's how it should be listed.
Right.
It should be listed the way
So-
you're doing it. It's not.
But hopefully you could figure it out at the table or
Yeah.
that day, and then as long as the lender's on board and everyone
Yeah.
signs off, you can get it figured out. So long as the seller agrees.
That's a good topic too.
But-
the security deposit thing.
Oh, you could definitely talk
that's a
for
great
30 minutes about it.
Yeah, that's definitely a good topic too.
Yeah. So
So
Further know that-
just do your
for the
due
next
diligence,
episode.
get your leases, get your rent rolls.
yeah, make sure you got all your information
it.
up front.
Yeah.
So that way you're not getting stuck. For sure. All right.
Till next time.